joining us. My name is Stacy Jensen. I'm the sales manager for the Business Intelligence and Document Management divisions here at HelpSystems. I'm your host for today's webinar. Your presenter and educator today is Steve Spiller. Steve?
Hi, everybody. Steve Spiller here, principal trainer at HelpSystems, working with the BI products. I'm glad to be presenting this topic to you today. It's one of my favorites. I think it's a little underutilized and it's very, very powerful. So I think you're going to enjoy this.
Thanks, Steve. A little housekeeping about today's session. If you have questions during the session, please use the questions feature to send your questions in. We will do our best to address those sessions at the end of the session. We are also recording, and a link to the recording will be sent in a follow-up email. We have a great educational session planned, but before we get started, I wanted to touch on the services that are available to our Sequel customers. Our training classes really help you get the most out of Sequel, and remember, a technical background is not required. We have scheduled classes, on-demand training. We even have customized class agendas to meet your unique needs. Maybe you don't need training. Maybe you just could use a good mentor. Those one-on-one small group sessions are typically conducted over your system with your data. The result is usable information and the strengthening of your Sequel skills. Consulting is available. We can help plan, assess, develop, and implement your data access and BI projects. Another area we can help in is with installation and upgrades. Lastly, if you're still using multiple tools to retrieve data, we can help you consolidate that work with Sequel with our migration services. Please feel free to reach out to your sales rep, myself, or even check the website if you'd like additional information on services. Steve, I think we're ready to get started.
Wonderful. Thanks, Stacy. All right, everybody. As you can see from the screen, our plan today has a number of points. I'm going to first off make sure you know what we mean by an application in Sequel and Viewpoint. We're going to discuss the anatomy of the application because it's got different pieces. You're going to have a chance to see how easy it is to create using the new application wizard. We're going to spend some time on the end user experience, both in the Windows world and in the browser world. There'll be a section on miscellaneous tips. Think of it as little housekeeping and bits and bobs, as well as a wrap up and an opportunity for you to chat in questions. Now, when we talk about Sequel and we're talking about applications, we're talking about Viewpoint. Viewpoint for creation, because that's our interface for creating applications, and also for deployment, if you're deploying it in Windows. We're also oftentimes talking about Sequel Web Interface, because that would be what you would use if you want a browser deploy, as opposed to Windows deploy. Now, there are some special considerations for a newer way of working with Sequel, something called repository mode, and it will be discussed a little bit near the end. So what is an application? Most people think of it as a drill down, but it's not really always going from top to bottom, so drill through might be more appropriate. Very important, it's something you already possess. As a Sequel customer, you already have everything you need to build applications. And guess what? It leverages the skills that you already have, your view building skills, your skills building runtime prompts into your inquiries, and so on. Now, for the end user, it provides a very dynamic experience, but it's guided. So you have control of where they go, and it's easy, and they can progress in organized ways. Once you create an application, it's very easy to go back and make changes and additions because your business isn't always static, it's changing, and your inquiry needs can change as well. Now, we're very focused on the IBM, but drill down applications are not limited to IBM data, since with Sequel and Viewpoint, you can actually connect and do inquiries over other data sources like Microsoft SQL Server or Oracle and so on, or possibly other IBMs on your network. So let's talk about the components or the anatomy of the drill down application. First off, I want to explain that when you build drill down applications, you're going to see evidence of two different types of ways of linking. We call them implied links or explicit links. And when I build applications, I only work with explicit links. And the main reason is implied links will only work in Windows, and explicit links work in Windows and the browser. So that gives you that opportunity for browser deployment. Now, I'll admit that implied links are a little bit easier to create. And with the explicit links, you have a little more to do as the designer, but the benefits are pretty great. First off, the implied links only work when there's matching names. A field name matching a variable name exactly will allow it to work. Otherwise, it doesn't. Whereas with your explicit links, the names of your fields or variables do not have to match. You have full control. You also don't have the same level of description that you can apply to the drill down paths, what I like to call the menu choices. You can customize the descriptions with the explicit link. You're also able to use the implied links with other types of, less types of SQL objects than the explicit. Only views in what we call SQL or host tables can be used with an implied link, where all the other SQL object types, like reports, etc., can be drilled to. In the designer, in the flow chart of the designer, you'll see that it's an implied link when you see a dashed line with an arrow pointing versus the solid line. And again, we're going to see the dashed lines, but we're going to be building the explicit links so we get the ability to browser deploy and to customize. So again, we're focusing on the explicit link, and the explicit link has three major components. If we're starting out simply, we begin normally with a view. So that's the starting point of the application. That view has to contain the columns visible that have values that you would pass in a drill down. So this particular view has the customer number that could be passed, or the customer type, or the region, or the state could be used as a value to pass in a drill down. Again, usually your first starting point is going to be a view or a host table. Then there's the option, and the option contains a little command to run the next step. It identifies where we drill to, which view or report or table do we drill to, and has a command parameters in it to provide information like the link between the field and the variable and descriptions, and it basically allows you to create a nice guided process. That command is actually going to be containing information to drive and call view 2, the second step, because that's where we're passing the value from the first view or result into a variable in the second. So just three things. It could be as simple as a view with a prompt, and a little option. Now let's look a little bit closer at the option command, because that's really the key to this working. So here at the top left, we have a view result where we have a number of choices on our menu of drill down paths. And I want to see the orders for a specific customer, the one that I've just chosen. That's going to initiate an option. Now, first off, the select clause that you see here is that view. And the columns that are available to pass are the ones that you see here in the select clause. In the middle, we have the actual command that is created. This identifies that we want to run the view called DDORed head from the customer listing, and that we want to pass the #$ field value into a variable of the second view, which has a prompt in it to catch a customer number or obtain a customer number. And we also have some things to describe it, like the text above the displayed result is picking up on the name of the field from the first view, the customer name field, so that we can actually put right across the top orders for NBCO Corporation Inc., the customer that we right-clicked on. So now we're going to focus on drill down application creation. First off, let me say it's pretty easy. Most of the work is done for you. So the wizard will take you through and do most of the hard stuff. You just have little tweaks to do. Now, easy doesn't mean unplanned. You've got to be ready. So before you even begin building your application, you need to make sure that you have the starting object, the possibly view that's going to have the columns in it that have data that I'd like to pass into the filter of the next level. And the destination object, again, could be a view, could be a different type of object, but with a variable in it waiting to receive that value to be passed. Now, the option file doesn't have to be created before you start, but you need to know where the location of an existing option file is to use it if you want to add the command string to an existing option file, or you might have to decide in advance where you're going to put this option file that holds the command string. So just where is it going to be? Where are you going to put it? Now, but where you put it does have some special considerations. The option file location, it should be in a library that is backed up. Same as the libraries that you create your SQL objects like your views and reports in. Excuse me. Never put it in the SQL program library because that might get updated during the next update of software, and you probably don't back up your SQL program library with the frequency that you do your object libraries. Now, we've talked about this option being somewhere, and there's no limitation. You can have multiple options in the same file, so you don't have to create a special file for every drill down application you create. But you got to think about some of those things before you begin. Then you get to start, and we launch just like we would new application, like we would do new view in Viewpoint. And it's going to launch wizard step 1, where you put in the description, which will be the description that appears in your Viewpoint Explorer when you go looking for that application later. Then you move on to step 2, top right, where you identify the library that it's going to be saved to. Now, most people create a file or use a file called opt file in whatever library they choose to hold all their options. You don't have to use that name, but it's somewhat traditional. The member is a file member, and sometimes people will have members that are specific to different departments, etc., just to organize. But again, we're basically saying where we're going to put this command string that we're creating to allow the drill down. Then we go and start choosing the objects we want. And that's going to be a basic browse and find the views or whatever other SQL objects you want to include. You're just going to browse for them and select them so that it knows that in this case, 7 objects will be part of the flow chart that is the drill down, where we're going from A to B, B to C, and so on. You also have the ability to choose which object is your starting point. Now, the first one you choose in step 3 will be the starting point by default, but you can choose a different one right here from the select from the list of application objects. So we just have to go through those wizard steps, and that's going to do one of 2 things. If your field name and variable names don't match, they're going to show up, the objects we choose, at the bottom of the screen. And in this case, 2 objects were chosen. If in fact we have field names that match or variable names that match to a field name, that information might show up in the flow chart with that dashed line with arrows. It's not a problem. We're still going to create explicit links regardless, but this is what you might see after going through the wizard. Now, the wizard's going to provide an awful lot of information. And after I run through the wizard, I can look at the option that was created. And what you see at the top right is that option. The description is the description of view number 2, my destination. Could change it, could not, up to you. The information that's displayed above the result, again, is the same description of view number 2. But it has identified that we want to drill to DDORD head X. That's the view that we want to drill to. And it has decided to create a set var. We'll talk more about set vars shortly, but this is where we relate the field to the variable based on what it knows from view 2. So view 2 has a variable called ampersand custno, and it's used it in the set var both as the from and to. Now, if your field name and variable names don't match, that has to be changed, as the example here at the bottom where we make some improvements. The most important thing is we change the set var value on the right to be the field name in our first view. So if the customer number column had a field name CUS, I change CUSNO in this expression to just CUS. That's the only thing that's required, but I choose to improve the description, view this customer's orders in uppercase because I like it there instead of orders for a customer. And I also go to the bottom and say, I want it to display the name of the customer I right-clicked on when I did my drill down above the data. And that change was made as well. The filter is something that a lot of people don't use, but you can fill in the name of the view, the destination, or the starting view that uses this. It's not necessary, but some people do. So I'm going to jump right now into a creation demo so you can see how easy it is, not just have me talk about it. All right. The first thing we need to be introduced to the objects that will be used. So our starting point is going to be a view called ddBeginX. And I can go into design mode just so you can see it's a fairly simple view over the customer master table. And the fields that are displayed, customer number, name, etc., are the values that can be passed in a drill down. Now the destination view is this view called DD orders. It has a variable in it. I'm going to actually go into the properties this time because that's just another way where you can see what it's got. And it's got a variable in it waiting to receive a customer number. So that variable is what we're going to be passing our value to. And that's really all we need to know. We need to know that it's a view that's waiting for a customer number so it can display its results. It can be run outside of the drill down application. And again, it will be just a normal runtime prompt to bring back activity for that particular customer number. So those are my two components. I'm going to go ahead and start. So what I'll be doing now is doing new application. And of course, I could go to the new tab and do the same thing. So this is where I'm going to put in a description. So this is just going to be webinar example. It's just a description. And then I'm going to click next. All right. Now, I always like to create a special member when I do training classes and webinars, one that doesn't exist, so you know that everything you're seeing was created by me today. So I'm saving it into my webinar BI library, and I'm just going to change the member to March 22, just so that we know that there's nothing up my sleeve. Now I'm going to click next, and it's going to say, hey, I didn't find that file member. Can I create it? Yes, I can. All right. So now I'm ready to actually pick some objects. I'm going to browse, and I'm going to choose that ddBeginX and that DD orders. So here's ddBeginX. I'm choosing it first. Then control click, just like choosing files when you're building a view, to grab the second. Click open. And I've got two objects selected, and that's all I need for the moment. I'm going to click next, and it's assuming that I want to start with the ddBeginX, which I do. So I don't have to use the select from list of objects to choose a different starting point. I'm actually done. I'm going to click finish. All right. As you can see, it appeared at the bottom, and it appeared in the bottom because, well, there was no matching field to variable name. Now, if I get to this point and I can't remember what the field name is for the customer number, the one that I'm going to pass, I can do a right click and do show fields, and it's named CUS. I can do the same thing with the second view where I'm my destination, and I can show the variables, and that's ampersand cusno. So I'm going to be passing CUS into ampersand cusno when I create my option. Close. Now, when I right click to build my option, I have to right click on the destination. And unfortunately, sometimes the create option menu option just doesn't show up. That does happen. It's a little pain, but that's okay. I'm happy with it. So all I have to do is go option file, open, and open. And now I can right click and I get that create option menu option to choose. So now it's gone and looked at DD orders and said, I'm extracting all this stuff from DD orders. I'm extracting orders for a customer as the description of the drill down path. And I'm going to make that be view this customer's orders. And I like it all uppercase because my eyes are not good as they used to be. It's got the right view to run, DD orders, but it didn't know that the field in my first view was not cusno, but cus. And all you have to do is change the character portion on the right side of the set var. So now it's cus. That's all I need. But while I'm here, I also want to change the text. Instead of saying orders for a customer, I'm going to do orders for, and I'm going to put in a variable name. Now, if I wanted to use the customer number, it would be ampersand, ampersand, cus. And we use the two ampersands. You may know this already because we're in quotes. But I happen to know that I have a field named CNAME in the select clause of my first view, and I can use that as well. So it'll put the customer's name out there. Now I can click OK and see how it jumps up into the flow chart and provides me with the drill down path as a solid line. I can run it without saving it, just to test it right here from File, Run Application. That only can be done when it's a solid line drill down. So the first view, DD begin X, looks the way it looks, nothing special. If I right click on a record though, I'm going to see my drill down path spelled out, and I click on it, and it brings up the activity for record 2, which is NBCO Corporation Inc. And we see that right there at the top. Now, again, it's also easy to augment and change your application. So for instance, I've just opened up this application that we've been using for a month, and I realize now that we need to be able to drill down further to get to the order line activity. So I want to add to it. So basically we have to add, where we could do a add object, right click, add object, or we can go to objects and choose add objects, either way. And then I'm just going to browse and find the DD/ORD line view that I want to use, because it happens to have, it's waiting for an order number, so I can see the details for a specific order. Notice how it showed up at the top in the flow chart, and that's because the field that holds the order number in DD orders is named ORDNO. And the variable in the destination is ampersand ORDNO, so they match. So now all I really have to do is create and modify the option. We always do that from the destination. So I'm going to right click right on DD/ORD line, doesn't matter whether it's at the flow chart or at the bottom, create option. The set var is already fine. All I have to do is make the aesthetic enhancements like view, caps lock off, view line items for this order. And in the text, I could do line items for order number, and then ampersand, ampersand, O-R-D-N-O. Got to spell it right, Steve. Click OK. Now the dashed line will become a solid line. And now we can do the file run application, drill one level. And remember, we could have multiple paths from the customer level. We're not limited to one. And I'll grab this one that's got 8 items on it, right click. Oh, I spelled it wrong. I got to go back in and change that. That's V-I-W, not V-I-E-W. Either way, you can see that it worked. We have our descriptors at the top, nice path descriptions. And I'm going to take a moment to save it before I move on. Boy, I'm not typing well today. All right. So that was the creation demo. As you can see, you can do it quite quickly. And most of the hard work is done for you. You do have to understand that relationship between the field value, which is on the right of the set var, and the destination, which is the variable, which is on the left of the set var, and just match up the names. The rest is just the aesthetics. So the end user experience, again, we've talked about this very early on. We're providing something that's guided but flexible. The user gets to choose what row they want to drill from, and they have could be one or many drill down paths to pick from to get the information they want. But they are limited to what you've put into the application. Now, this is an example of just the process of running from Viewpoint and also from the browser. So we start left to right at the top. We have our view that we would say double click on possibly in the existing or recent tab of the Explorer. Then we right click on the record of interest and we have our option to choose a path. And that's done with a right click and then a left click on the actual description, in this case, orders for selected customer. And that's going to provide you with the data. And you kind of saw that happen. Now, in the browser world, it's a little bit different. If I double click to run the application from the browser Explorer, it's going to look a bit different. Notice these little blue arrows next to each row. You can't right click in the browser and have the same effect as you can in Windows. So clicking on the arrow is the same as doing a right click in Windows. And then you're going to get your same selection of drill down paths. And when you choose an option on the drill down path, it's going to take you to the destination results here on the bottom right. Just remember that we can actually tell real quickly without even clicking on the arrow that there's a drill down because from the order header level, because we've got those arrows there kind of indicating there's a drill down. You might not know that here at the top until you right click and see what the menu option says. Now, why do we have Viewpoint and running in Windows, and why do we have it in the web interface? Well, different requirements. In Windows, you have to have a profile and a password. You have to have Viewpoint installed, and you have to have IBM I Access or Access Client Solutions, whatever, to be able to connect to the IBM. So that's all required for an end user to run that application in Windows. On the browser side, you still have to have a profile and password. That's required, and you need to use a supported browser, which, we support all the majors. So the fact of the matter is, less to have out there for an end user to use it, but they still have to sign on to get the information. They have to prove they're authorized. Okay, so we've actually seen some of this work from Viewpoint from within the design screen. So in the end user experience demo, I'm going to at least start off with the browser environment. And I've got a browser that I'm just going to bring up onto the screen. I just clicked the wrong one. Well, it doesn't matter. I had one already minimized. That's all right. Again, I'm starting in a browser screen, and that's actually the wrong one. Let me just close that. Sorry. Actually, gonna have to go back to my screen on the. I have to launch the browser from here because actually this is where I'm at. Okay, so I've got a shortcut to take me to on my IBM called Vaughn. I have to sign on, as you can see right here. This worked earlier for me. What in the world? Oh, that was actually human error. I'm not going to admit why. All right, so I'm going to go to the library where I've been saving these things. Webinar_BI. And they all began DD, and I created one called DD example. So that's the one that was created just right now on the 22nd of March. And I'm going to double click to run it. Obviously, I could use a right click to display it, but double click will do the same thing. And here we can see the actual first view, our DD begin X view with its results and its arrows down. Now I'm going to use the same path I did before, clicking the arrow next to NBCO Corporation Inc., where I can see my drill down path description or menu option if you prefer, and I'm going to click it. Now, one difference here between the Windows environment and the browser environment is it's tabular. So here is my application with my first result. Here on this tab is my drill to result, and I can go back and another path and open up another tab. But I'm going to go ahead and drill down, and I'm going to choose that same, well, I'll just choose a different record. Here's one with 5 rows that I'll choose where we ship via best way. And I'm going to click that arrow, and then my embarrassment of spelling view wrong, and show you the result there. So we can actually see those results. Of course, we can do all the things we can do in the browser, just like in Viewpoint. So we can chart, and we can save things to Excel, etc., just like we can in Viewpoint. But the drill down works just the same way. And if I was to drill down on, say, a different customer, like I just need to find one that I know has activity. I think Lim Equipment has at least 2 records, if I recall correctly. That's going to open up another tab. So here I have the Lim Equipment Company data, and over here I have the NBCO Corporation Inc. data. So I kind of like that because it gives you a nice uncluttered screen. And though it's not a whole lot new to see, I don't know if I actually saved this yet, so I'm going to do a quick save. And I'm going to run it from the recent tab. So here's DD example in Windows. Double click, right click, and you saw this earlier, but just to kind of compare to the browser. And then right click like so. So they both work very well. They provide a nice result. And guide the user to where they need to be. All right, so that was the end user experience demo. We now have some miscellaneous things to cover. All right, host tables. Now, you may not think of them as host tables. Technically, they're just called tables or sometimes SQL tables. We've been calling them host tables ever since the client table came out. But host tables is summarized data, row and column from a view. But some people want to start their drill down from a host table. The host table, the only field values that can be passed in a drill down are the ones that come from the dimension. And the dimension are the fields that make up the rows. So in this example, our rows are made up of product line books, year, and month. So line, year, and month. Those fields could be passed into a drill down. But the fields that are used for the actual categories, which are generically referred to as columns, or the cell values, which are known as column fields, those can't be passed. So if you do have a host table that you want to drill down from, you can. You just have that limitation of using the dimension fields. Another part of drill down that comes up a lot, especially when you start off with a view that prompts for a start date and an end date, as so many do, is that prompt values have to be displayed to be passed. Okay, so if I run my view and I'm prompted for a start date and an end date, and my result looks like the image at the middle, then those dates are not visible in the displayed result, so they can't be passed to the next level. So here at the bottom, if I was using that view as a starting point for a drill down application and I wanted the start date and end date range to stay in effect level by level by level, I would add those two values from the prompts in as columns of my view. So I add date and end date column to the view so that they were available to be passed. And that's not that hard to do. Here we see the variables tab and end date. Notice they're named ampersand start and ampersand end. So what we do in the select clause or in the files and fields tab of your view is we create a calculated column, which is made up of that start date and end date variable. And we're creating a string, so it's the variable name with quotes around it and the extra ampersand, something that you've probably encountered with other views you've got because of SQL's demand of what it does with things in quotes. So just by putting the variable name into the field with the quotes around it and an extra ampersand, you now create a field that's available to be displayed. So the actual alternate names, start date and end date, are what will be used in the set var of the variable, that command string. So notice how the end date field name is used to pass into an end var for the next level of drill, and the same with start date. So it's just a matter of putting in alternate names, knowing what they are, and having that prompt value become a physical column or a derived column in your result. Again, if you're going to go level by level by level, you're going to need those start dates and end dates on each level to keep passing them down to restrict the results to just activity for a particular period or set of periods or range of dates. Now, you saw me do this during training, but I always like to have a slide in it. For whatever reason, sometimes when you right-click on the destination, you don't get the opportunity or the menu option that says create option, like the image here at the top. So what I did in the demonstration was went to the option file menu, chose open, then click open again. And all that does is it makes sure that the application knows which option we're using. And then at that point, when we right-click on the destination view that we want to use the option with, we get that create option that kicks the whole process off. A couple other little things. Cross-server drills. Not a lot of people have done this, but it can be useful. Let's say most of your data is on the IBM, but at some point you have to drill to a different IBM or possibly to another platform entirely on your network. Views can retrieve data from multiple servers at many different times using what we call remote database connectivity. So if I have a view, but a view is limited to just a single server. So I can have an application that begins with a view that looks at like my IBM data, and when I need to get to the data that's in the payroll system, which is on my Oracle server, I can have a view that uses the Oracle server's data, and all I have to do is create a set var to match the field name from the view that's got IBM data to the variable in the view that is interrogating the Oracle database. So you don't have to limit yourself to the IBM. You can cross-platform drill. Now, I mentioned repository mode. Repository mode is another aspect. It's another environment for SQL, and I'm not going to go into it now, but in at least not in detail, every SQL object in repository mode has two parts, and the visible part, say in the Explorer, is called a shortcut and has a very long name. The drill down applications are designed to work with the shorter IBM object names, the ones that are 10 characters or less. So what you have to do is identify with just the right-click properties what the actual IBM object name in a library is and use that when you're building the application. So it's just a little extra step because drill down applications have to look not at these shortcut objects, but at these IBM objects, also known as user space objects. That's their technical term, but they're in a library. Stacy, I think you're up.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Before we do our wrap up and answer questions, we do have a quick polling question for our SQL customers. So I'm going to launch that. And Steve,
I don't think I get to see the polling question as a presenter, so it's not going to show up on my screen.
it's not showing on my screen either.
Oh, do I have to make you the presenter? I didn't think so.
No. Let's try this again. There we go. Can you see? I believe it's showing now.
I
so
see
our
poll
question,
open, but not the poll.
Yeah, our question for our customers is how can HelpSystems help you with your SQL training needs? And we have 5 options there. We have new members. They could use SQL training. We know the basics, but could use training on advanced topics. We need more training on administration, setup, and security. We could benefit from some personalized mentoring. We do not have any training needs. So we'll just give you a couple seconds to go ahead and answer that. And then I will pass it back to you, Steve, to do our wrap up. Thanks everyone for answering. Steve, are you still there? Yep.
I sure am.
Okay.
I was just pausing in case there were some last minute clicks.
Got it.
All right, so to sort of kind of go into what have we covered prior to you chatting in any questions or using the questions option actually to put in your questions is usually best. So just to summarize, we began with defining what we mean by an application, and we learned how it could be used both in the browser world as well as the Windows world. We then talked about the components of the application, the beginning point, the view possibly, the option that basically connects the two with a command string, and the destination. We also learned about the difference between an explicit link with a solid line and the implied link with the dashed line. We had a chance to do the creation using the wizard from scratch, and we saw how it was really kind of a fill in the blanks for the most part, with a minor change to the option after we got to the actual flowchart screen. We learned about refining the option, where we could basically make sure that the field and the variable matched, as well as putting in customized descriptions for the drill down path in the menu, and adding a customized description to show up above the results that was dynamic enough to pick up the value of what was passed to get that data. So we know we're looking at this particular customer, and we don't actually have to have that customer name in a column in our result. We focused on the end user experience. So we started off there with the browser world, where we could see how friendly it was and see that tabular way of displaying the results. And we had the opportunity to see something that didn't require Viewpoint or Access Client Solutions. And we saw the windows again, where we do need Viewpoint and we do need the connectivity. Both required a sign on to the eye. Last but not least, those are miscellaneous topics. We covered a number of little things that were kind of wrapping things up in housekeeping. Again, that drill between platform types can be really powerful if you've got data that you need to get to, which is on another platform, or possibly even on a high availability IBM where you keep and archive older data that you might need to drill to. So we can drill across to that as long as the connection has been set up by your SQL administrators and they're on the same network. So now's our opportunity, right?
It is. Thanks, Steve. That was packed with a lot of really good information. So let's move on and answer some of the questions that came in. Maybe we can tag team this. I do have one here. I have built a lot of SQL reports. Can we use Drilldown to get to a report?
Yes, you can. There's no issue whatsoever, but you will see a few different. The option, if you actually look closely, first off, that report is going to have to be built on a view that's got a variable in it. And in the option, you're going to see, if you look closely, the option had a display command, because display commands can display views and they can display host tables. But your option will actually use the report command, and it'll do it automatically. It'll sense that the destination object was a report, and it's going to use the report command in that command string because it's the right one for running the report object.
Great.
Good question.
Okay. Yeah. I have started to use star server syntax instead of SQL syntax. Do I have to do anything different than what you just showed?
That's a good question too. A lot more of our customers are using server syntax for some of the more complicated views. I mean, we all love the star SQL syntax, but every so often it does something really nice. But really there's nothing to do because the command string in the option calls the view by name. And the variable portion of the view is the same regardless of syntax, as is the fields in the select clause or the columns that have to be passed. So there's really nothing you have to do at all.
Okay. Is there a class specifically for Drilldown? I know you've got a lot of classes out there.
Somebody is interested in that. And you know something, I developed a class and I retired it because as a rule, when we're working with drill downs in a customer, it's a one-on-one, one-on-two kind of thing. And we find that it's better to actually build those drill downs on your system using your own data. That way you leave the mentoring session with knowledge and a deliverable that you can showcase. So we're finding people are using mentoring as their way to learn drill downs, and that class has really been retired because it's a better way to learn it and you come away with something you can use right away.
Sure. Okay, great. Is the browser functionality still an add-on to the SQL license? And I'll take that one.
Yes.
So yes, the SQL web interface does require a separate license, and your sales rep can certainly help you figure out if you already own that, or if you need some additional information on licensing on that, they can provide that. So Steve, let's see here. I don't know if you're able to see. There is a question regarding start and end dates. Looks like they don't want to see the start and end date. Can I make the columns hidden?
You know something? You're not the first person to ask that. Unfortunately, the answer is no. It has to be visible to be passed. Hiding the column gets in the way of doing it. And I guess I call it a necessary evil.
Okay.
Now, let me actually take it back a step. There are ways to accomplish it. Drill down applications actually can be called from a script or script view. Actually, no, a script, not a script view, a script in Viewpoint. So what some people will do to accomplish that, and in some ways that can be better from a performance point of view if you're working over really big data files, is that they have an execute command in a script, which is going to basically take and retrieve the data for the start date and end date and throw it into a temporary file. Then the views that utilize that are utilized in the drill down, they're not going to be looking at the production file that might have 10 years of data in it. They're going to be looking at the copy of that file that only has the last 6 months in it. That's what would be used. And since the file that we're interrogating has only got the date range that you provided the answer for at the beginning of the script when you ran the script, then it will continue using that date range all the way down and not care. So there is a way to do it. It does involve using a script and a command that we can do in a script called run app. So yes, there is a way to do it. So if it's that annoying to have those dates, yes, it can be done.
There's always ways to make things happen in SQL, right?
Always ways, always ways.
Yeah. Can an application be a shortcut similar to reports we run from a common folder for each department?
Again, those shortcuts that you have in a common folder, those run only if the person who's running it has Viewpoint installed and can sign on. So it's the same requirements of running it from a view. And the answer is yes, you can create a shortcut and you could put it in a folder and it could be run by multiple people that way. The other thing you can do in the browser world where you don't have to have that infrastructure is you can basically create a shortcut, which is the URL that launches the application. And again, that can be distributed and made available to people in a folder or possibly just as a bookmark or shortcut in their browser.
Great.
Good questions.
Yep. There is a question regarding dimension fields. Steve, I don't know if you saw that. I did not understand what Steve said about dimension fields.
Well, that probably means you haven't created what we call a host or SQL table before. A SQL table or a host table is an object in SQL and Viewpoint that points back to a view, but it's designed to create summarized results. And the dimension is basically us choosing fields that will make up the row summarization. And the other objects that can't be passed make up the columns or the cells. So a lot of people will equate this to like a pivot table in Excel. But unlike the pivot table in Excel, with Excel, you have to download all the detailed data to your PC, and then it does that cross-tab summarization. But in SQL with a host table, the data never IBM, just the result. So you could have millions and millions of records that are produced at detail, and you can turn them into just a few rows and columns of summarized result with that host table. So sometimes people like to start there because that's like a high level starting point, but they want to be able to drill from that summarized result to greater detail. But they can only drill on the fields that make up the row summarization of that host table. And you may want to, I'm sure we have on the community portal some recordings that talk about these host tables, and you could learn more about it if getting that summarized result is useful to you. And then it's just a matter of knowing that the fields that make up the row summarization, they're called dimensions in our software, are the only values that can be passed. Hopefully that answered the question. Host tables is a fairly robust topic to try to answer in just a minute. So hopefully that gave you a little insight.
Great, thanks. Why do users need access client solutions for Viewpoint?
Because that's the only way we can connect to the IBM with Viewpoint. We don't use ODBC connections or something like that. We use the OLEDB provider that requires that I'd say more substantial connection. So depending on what version of Windows you have, on Windows 10 and above, you have to use IBM Access Client Solutions. If you have a earlier version of Windows, the product used to be called IBM iAccess or Client Access. Either way, Viewpoint requires that level of connection. And again, some people don't want to deploy Viewpoint and Access Client Solutions to their end users, which is why that browser deployment is such a nice way to go, because you just need a browser, which they already have, and they still have to sign on when prompted, so they can't get at data they're not supposed to.
Yep, so the question just came in, does the browser with SQL Web Interface need Access Client Solutions, which you basically—
No, it does not. No, it does not.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Well, I think that wraps up the questions. Thanks, Steve, for the great training session and answering all of these questions. So our hope is that you learned enough about application drill downs to identify areas where they can deliver just needed analysis within your organization. If you have any question on services, feel free to explore the website, reach out to your sales rep, reach out to me directly. We're happy to help. As I mentioned in the beginning, you will receive a follow-up email that will include a link to the recording. And again, thanks, Steve. Nice job with the training.
It was nice presenting this topic to everybody. Have a great rest of your week.
Yep. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. We hope you have a great day.